I always believed your name was the one thing you truly owned, the one thing no one could take. My name is Jenna Pierce, and I'm staring at my family's legacy, the hardware store taped off like a crime scene. My father won't look at me. My brother looks like he wants to kill me. They say I'm the one who destroyed our family. But what do you do when the people you love most are the ones who forged your name on a $60,000 loan? What happens when you find out that's just the beginning, and they're dragging the whole town down with them? Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. I'm standing on the cracked pavement opposite Pierce Home and Supply, my father's store, my family's store. Yellow tape crisscrosses the glass doors, stark against the faded red paint. An official-looking notice, stark white and unforgiving, is taped right where Dad used to hang the open sign. My father. Tom Pierce stands near the curb, his shoulders rigid. He won't look at me. He just stares at the building, his jaw set so tight it looks like it's been carved from granite. My brother Evan is vibrating with a rage I can feel from 20 feet away. He keeps looking from the locked doors to me, and his expression is a terrifying storm of wanting to either kill me or hug me. I honestly can't tell which. This is the day my family loses everything, and it's my fault. Or at least, that's what they'll tell you. But it started with one email. Just a few weeks ago, I was Jenna Pierce, staff accountant. My life was a column of figures that balanced perfectly. I worked at the community hospital in Redford, Iowa, a town where everyone knows your name and who you had dinner with last night. I was good with numbers, meticulous, the kind of person who finds comfort in a reconciled ledger. I was quiet, maybe a little self-effacing, but I had a core of resilience I was proud of. My small, cozy apartment above the bakery on Main Street always smelled like fresh bread and represented the stability I'd built for myself. I had Mark, my boyfriend, a mechanic who ran his own shop with a quiet competence I adored. He was supportive, though he didn't know the full extent of my family's messy, unspoken tensions. I had student loans, yes, but I had a plan. A careful 5-year path to rebuild my credit, maybe a starter home, maybe marriage and kids. Someday. I valued stability, honesty, and doing things the right way, probably because I'd seen so much of the opposite. Then came the email. It was a Tuesday. I was at my desk sipping lukewarm coffee and reconciling travel expenses for the surgical department. The alert popped up in my personal inbox. Your credit score has changed. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a 2-point dip because I'd paid my gas bill a day early. I clicked. My score hadn't just changed, it had fallen off a cliff. And there at the top of the alerts was the reason. Final notice. Loan in default. The amount made the air leave my lungs. Over $60,000. My hands went cold. A high, thin ringing started in my ears. I never took out that loan. In a small town like Redford, your name is your currency. It's your reputation. And this felt like a stain I could never wash off. My fingers were numb as I dialed the lender's number. A polite woman informed me that yes, I was the primary co-signer on a business expansion loan, the collateral Pierce Home and Supply. The account hadn't just missed a payment, it was months delinquent. The Pierces, my family, my father Tom, the old-school self-made man who lived and breathed the family legacy. My mother Linda, polished and perfect, whose entire life was dedicated to maintaining our good reputation in the church and the community. And my older brother Evan. Charming, charismatic Evan, the heir apparent whose history was a graveyard of risky ideas and unfinished projects. I was just Jenna, the responsible one, the one expected to quietly help to balance the books, but never to outshine. I flashed back 6 months, the 3 of them standing in my small apartment, making it feel even smaller. Evan pacing with restless energy, pitching his vision, an online order and delivery platform, an expansion of inventory. Modernizing for the future, he'd called it. He needed a small bridge loan, just a formality. It's low risk, Jen, I swear, he'd said, flashing that smile that always worked on everyone. You'll be off the note in a few months. My parents stood there smiling a united front. We need to support the family, Mom had murmured, placing a hand on my arm. Believe in Evan's vision. I wanted to belong. I wanted just once to be seen as a true partner in the legacy they were all so proud of. So I signed. I signed without reading every line, without understanding just how vulnerable I was making myself. That Sunday, I walked into my parents' mid-century ranch house for our weekly dinner, the air thick with the smell of pot roast. I didn't take off my coat. I just walked to the dining table and dropped the printed-out final notice. The envelope with its red warning landed right next to the gravy boat. Evan laughed a short, sharp bark. "Jen, relax. It's just paperwork, a timing issue." My father scowled. "Don't make a scene, Jenna. You're upsetting your mother." Mom immediately tried to smooth it over. "He's right, dear. Don't embarrass your brother. He's under so much pressure." But the cold dread in my stomach had hardened into steel. "This is my credit," I said, my voice shaking but rising. "My future, my name. You promised. You said it was temporary. Why are the payments months behind?" My father's mask of the proud patriarch dropped. His eyes went flat. "We gave you everything. We paid for that college that made you think you're so smart. And you can't handle a little risk for your own family. How selfish are you?" I left the ungrateful hanging in the air. I sat in my car, tears blurring the dashboard lights. I pulled the crumpled papers from my bag, the original loan agreement I'd dug out of my files. And that's when I saw it. The dates. The loan had been taken out in full before they ever came to my apartment. My signature wasn't a requirement to get the loan. It was just added. They didn't just need my help. They needed a fall guy. And they picked me. Sleep wasn't an option. Back in my apartment, the scent of vanilla from the bakery below felt suffocating. The hurt from my father's words was a raw physical ache. But underneath it, something else was surfacing, the cold, methodical instinct of the accountant. My family had lied, but numbers didn't. I spent the rest of the night at my kitchen table, my laptop glowing in the dark. I pulled my full credit reports from all 3 bureaus. I logged into my online banking, searching for any transfers I might have forgotten. And then I dove into public records. I searched the Secretary of State's website for Pierce Home and Supply LLC. I scanned county records for notices of liens or judgments. The responsible, quiet Jenna was gone, replaced by a forensic investigator fueled by coffee and betrayal. By 3 a.m., the picture was horrifying. It wasn't just my $60,000 loan. I found a business line of credit for the store maxed out. I found a second loan, one I'd never even heard of, taken out 8 months ago, under my parents' names, also delinquent. The property tax payments on the store building itself were 3 months behind. They weren't just struggling, they were sinking. And then I found it. A new entity filed just last year, Redford Revive Fund. I remembered the name. My family had been promoting it at church and the local paper. A community investment initiative to revitalize Main Street. It sounded noble, but the state filings told a different story. It was just a standard limited liability company with Tom Pierce and Evan Pierce listed as the sole managers. The corporate address was a UPS store box. My betrayal widened, cracking open into a chasm. They hadn't just used me, they might be using the entire town. I thought back to Thanksgiving, my mom bragging at the table. "Everyone trusts the Pierces," she'd said, preening. "They're just lining up to invest." The next day, sick with dread, I did the unthinkable. I started visiting those investors. I started with Mrs. Alvarez, a widow who lives down the street. She invited me in for coffee, her eyes crinkling with kindness. She told me she'd invested nearly all of her late husband's life insurance. "Tom and Evan are going to bring this town back, you'll see," she said, pulling out her statement. I went to the Crawfords, a middle-aged couple saving for retirement. "We didn't want Wall Street," Mr. Crawford said, puffing his chest. "We wanted to invest locally." They all had them glossy statements from the Redford Revive Fund, a fancy logo of a rising sun over Main Street, projected returns of 8 to 10%, talk of future coffee shops, a community center, new jobs. My stomach churned. The nausea was overwhelming as I realized their investments, their retirement, their security were probably being used to patch the holes in the failing hardware store to pay off old debts. Or worse. I asked for copies citing my accounting background. Just want to make sure the numbers look right for you? I'd lied, my voice hollow. They handed them over without a second thought. That night, I waited for Evan. I parked my car down the street and watched him lock up the store. I cornered him in the back parking lot under the humming yellow streetlights and the flickering neon Pierce sign, Jenna. What the hell, you're scaring me. I didn't waste time. I laid out what I'd found, my voice as cold and hard as the pavement. The second loan, Evan, the maxed out line of credit, the fund's real legal structure. I know about Mrs. Alvarez. I know about the Crawfords. He laughed, a short, dismissive bark. God, you're snooping now. What are you trying to ruin me? When I didn't flinch, the charm curdled into anger. The store is struggling, okay. The big box chains, the internet. You don't get it. This is how business works now. You leverage what you can to survive. He tried to frame himself as the visionary, the savior. You're just too timid, Jen. You're always so by the book. I stepped closer. Vision doesn't require lying to old ladies about their life savings. He stared at me, the surprise in his eyes hardening into something ugly. He leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. If you blow this up, you don't just ruin me. You ruin Mom. You ruin Dad. You ruin our name. You really want to be that girl. I drove away, shaking my headlights, cutting through the dark. I was that girl. I had to be. As I pulled up to my apartment, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. They're not telling you everything. Check the transfers from the fund account. I stared at the message, my blood running cold. Someone else knew. Someone was watching. This new information gave me the leverage I needed. I called Sarah, a friend from high school who was now a junior clerk at the bank that held the fund's account. I used the login information one of the investors had unknowingly given me. They'd been told to check their portal for updates. Sarah, bless her, didn't ask too many questions when I just asked her to confirm what I was seeing. The bank statements for the Redford Revive Fund painted a picture not of community development, but of personal desperation. There were large, unexplained transfers out of the fund straight into a personal account in Evan's name. Another transfer paid off a credit card I knew belonged to my father. And then the final devastating line item, a major transfer to a regional casino in the neighboring state. This wasn't just bad business, this was fraud. And seeing the casino payment, I realized it was maybe addiction too. This was too big for me. It was too big for Redford. If the Pierces were going to burn Redford down for one more gamble, I wasn't going to hand them the matches. The casino transfer broke something in me. The family fight was one thing. This was a betrayal of an entire community. I couldn't go to the local sheriff. He played golf with my father every Thursday. I needed someone I could trust, someone with a moral compass that wasn't warped by local politics. I thought of Mr. Dalton. He'd been my high school civics teacher, a man who genuinely believed in the power of the individual. Democracy starts on your street, he used to say. Now he was on the Redford Town Council. I found him at his home, a small house overflowing with books. I sat at his kitchen table and laid it all out. My loan default notice, copies of Mrs. Alvarez's and the Crawfords' investment agreements, and a summary of the bank transfers I'd seen, including the one to the casino. He read everything in silence, his expression growing graver with each page. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. This isn't just a family fight, Jenna, he said, his voice low. This is possible securities fraud. It's well beyond us. He made a call right then and there to a former student of his, someone who worked in the state attorney general's office. 2 days later, I was in a sterile conference room in Des Moines, sliding an organized tabbed binder and a USB drive across the table to Marissa Cole, an investigator from the Financial Crimes Division. My accounting skills, my meticulous nature had finally found their purpose. She reviewed the documents with a practiced neutral expression. "This is very well organized," she said, which felt like the highest compliment I'd ever received. "Once we open a formal investigation," she warned me, "things will move slowly and then very, very fast. The town will know. Your family will know." She asked me to keep gathering what I could quietly, but not to confront my family again. "An investigation like this lives or dies on internal documents," she said, tapping the binder. "We'll need cooperation from someone inside the business, a bookkeeper maybe." I drove back to Redford feeling like I'd armed a bomb. That night my phone rang. My mother. "Jenna, dear, your father and we'd like you to come over. Just to talk. No fighting, I promise." It was an ambush. I walked into the dining room and all three of them were there, seated at the table like a tribunal. They presented a perfect united front. "We're in a rough patch, that's all," Tom began, trying the reasonable approach. "You're overreacting like always," Evan chimed in, the old gaslight. Then came the shame. "How dare you go to outsiders about private family business?" My father boomed, his face turning red. I felt the old childhood conditioning kick in, the urge to apologize, to make myself small. But the image of Mrs. Alvarez's face stopped me. My father saw my resolve and his tactics shifted. "You keep talking, and we'll tell everyone you're mentally unstable. That you're bitter jealous of Evan's success." My mother on cue dissolved into tears. "You're going to kill your father with this stress, Jenna. Is that what you want?" I stood my ground. "I just want the truth," I said, my voice shaking. I didn't reveal the AG's involvement. I just let their threats hang in the air and walked out. As I passed Evan in the hall, he grabbed my arm and whispered, his voice pure venom, "If you drag us down, we're dragging you with us." The community spin campaign began immediately. Suddenly I was met with cold shoulders at the grocery store. People I'd known my whole life at church would turn and whisper when I walked by. The rumor was that I was trying to destroy my own family, all over some money I felt I was owed. The isolation was suffocating. Even Mark, my anchor, was struggling. "Jenna, my customers are talking," he said one night, his face etched with worry. "They're saying you're ungrateful, that you're attacking your dad." We had our first real fight, him accusing me of picking a battle I couldn't win, me accusing him of not believing me. I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. A few days later, another text from the unknown number. This time it was a photo. The back office of Pierce Home and Supply. 2 large, overflowing shred bins. They were destroying evidence. I thought of Marissa's words. "We'll need someone inside." Kylie Brooks, the store's bookkeeper. Kylie was a single mom in her early 40s, quiet, soft-spoken, and deeply grateful for her job. She was also terrified of my father. I caught her on her lunch break in her car. I laid out what I knew, my voice gentle. "Kylie, I know you've seen it. I know things are wrong." She burst into tears, admitting she'd seen 2 sets of numbers, one for the investors and one for whatever Evan was doing. She was terrified of losing her job, of not being able to feed her kids. "This isn't just about us, Kylie," I pleaded, leaning on the values I knew she held. "This is about Mrs. Alvarez. This is about the Crawfords. This is about people who trusted your spreadsheets with their retirement." She looked at me, her fear warring with her conscience. She nodded, a single sharp movement. She would secretly copy the real ledgers, the real transaction histories. She would turn them over to Marissa. I felt a small, grim sense of victory, but it didn't last. The next morning, a flyer was tucked under my door. A special community meeting, called by Tom and Evan Pierce, to be held at the Redford Town Hall. The flyer read, "To address vicious rumors and restore trust in our community." They were going to control the narrative, to paint themselves as victims, and me as the villain, all in one public spectacle. My hands were shaking as I called Marissa. She was quiet for a moment. "They just moved our timeline up," she said. Then my phone buzzed with a text from her. "We'll be there, if you're ready." The Redford Town Hall was overflowing. It felt like the entire county was packed inside the air, thick with body heat, cheap perfume, and anxious whispers. I saw farmers in clean overalls, retirees I knew from the church, young families I'd gone to high school with. Banners hung from the rafters, sagging relics from my father's last big Support Local campaign, with the Pierce Home and Supply logo printed proudly on them. On the stage, under the harsh fluorescent lights, sat my family. Tom, my father, in the dark suit he only wore for weddings and funerals, projecting an aura of solemn command. Linda, my mother, polished and pale, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. And Evan, playing the part of the humbled visionary, his face a mask of earnest concern. I slipped in through the back, but heads turned. I felt their eyes on me. I was the villain in this story, the spectacle. I scanned the back wall and found them. Marissa Cole and another man in a suit standing quietly. Near them, Mr. Dalton sat in the last row, a quiet moral anchor in the churning sea of public opinion. Evan spoke first, his voice cracking with just the right amount of emotion. He talked about his dream about doing everything to save Main Street. He dismissed the vicious rumors as terrible misunderstandings and half-truths spread by people who didn't understand the pressure of innovation. He framed himself as a risk-taker, someone who might have pushed too hard, but always had the town's best interests at heart. Then my father stood up, leaning on the lectern like a preacher. For 30 years, he boomed, his voice resonating with authority. The name Pierce has meant something in Redford. It has meant trust. It has meant community. He locked eyes with people in the front row. I am asking you to trust us now, like you always have. There was scattered applause. People wanted to believe them. It was easier than believing they'd been conned. They opened the floor to questions. Before anyone else could stand, I was walking down the central aisle. The microphone was heavy and cold in my hand. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I looked at the crowd and saw them. Mrs. Alvarez, her face a knot of confusion. The Crawfords looking worried. I turned to the stage. "I have a question," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'd like to know why I received a final default notice for a $60,000 loan I was told was a short-term formality." I didn't wait for an answer. I calmly explained my own loan. I explained the real structure of the Redford Revide Fund, how it was a private LLC, not a community trust. And then I talked about the transfers. "I'd like to know," I said, my voice rising, "why money from that fund, money from our neighbors, was transferred to personal accounts and to a casino in the next state." As I spoke, Marissa Cole in the back calmly connected a laptop to the hall's projector. The screen flickered, and then there it was. Ledger pages, bank transfers. My words were no longer accusations. They were facts projected 10 feet high. The eruption was immediate. Gasps turned to shouts. "Is this true?" someone yelled. "My money is in that fund," Mrs. Alvarez cried out. My father's face went purple with rage. "You," he roared, pointing at me. "You did this. You sold out your own family to these bureaucrats." As if on cue, Marissa and her colleagues stepped forward, badges held high. "We're from the State Attorney General's office," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We are conducting a formal inquiry." That's when my mother broke. She collapsed in her chair, a raw animal sob tearing from her throat. "We were going to lose it," she shrieked, all polish gone. "We were months from foreclosure. Your father, his pride, he wouldn't admit the big box store was killing us." All eyes snapped to Evan. He looked trapped, the charm evaporating. "I was trying to win it back." He blurted out a desperate confession. "I used some of the money, yes, but I gambled to get it back. I always meant to fix it before anyone got hurt." The truth was out. They weren't just cartoon villains. They were desperate, prideful, and deeply criminally flawed. I felt a painful, sickening lurch of fury and pity. Marissa took the microphone. "The fund's accounts are being frozen effective immediately," she declared. Tom, Linda, and Evan Pierce are all subjects of a formal investigation. Criminal charges are likely. The crowd exploded. Thieves! Someone screamed. Mrs. Alvarez was openly sobbing, her small body shaking. My father stared at me, his eyes filled with a pure, undiluted hatred that seared my skin. "You're the daughter who killed her own family," he spat. In that second, I could have let my rage take over. I could have pushed for the harshest punishment fueled by years of being the responsible one. But I looked at Kylie, the bookkeeper, standing mutely by the wall, terrified for her livelihood. I looked at the Crawfords, whose retirement was gone. This wasn't just about me. I stepped back to the microphone. "I want full restitution," I said, my voice clear. "I want transparency, but most of all, I want justice that prioritizes the victims and helps this community recover." I wasn't asking for maximum prison time. I was asking for them to fix what they broke. It was too much for him. My father grabbed the lectern, his face contorted. He made a gasping sound, clutched his chest, and collapsed into his chair. "Dad!" Evan screamed. People surged forward. "Call 911!" Someone was already on the phone. Paramedics pushed through the stunned crowd. As they wheeled him out on a gurney, his eyes found mine. He was pale, sweating, but the hatred was still there. He whispered just loud enough for me to hear over the din. "You'll regret this, Jenna. You've destroyed us all." The sirens wailed, growing closer, and I just stood there shaking. It's been almost a year. The firestorm I unleashed has settled, and the landscape of Redford and my life is irrevocably changed. My father, Tom, survived the mild heart attack he had in the town hall. He pled guilty to reduced charges of financial mismanagement and fraud. He's on probation, serving house arrest in a small rental unit, the big ranch house sold to cover a fraction of the debts. Evan took a plea deal, a short prison term, which he's now finishing, followed by a long probation and a crippling mandatory restitution schedule. Linda, my mother, wasn't charged, but in a town like Redford, social disgrace is its own kind of prison. The store building was repossessed. The Redford Revive Fund was, of course, dissolved by the state. In its place, a new community-run nonprofit has risen painstakingly from the ashes. Mr. Dalton is the board chair. Kylie Brooks, the bookkeeper who risked everything, is the treasurer. And I am its independent financial compliance officer. Every transaction is posted online. Our fundraisers are potluck dinners, modest but honest. As for me, I'm still Jenna Pierce, but that name means something different now. I spent months fighting to get the fraudulent loan cleared from my record. I won. I'm now taking night classes, studying for a certification in forensic accounting and fraud examination, partially funded by a state victim support program. I've found a new quiet vocation. I want to help other small towns, other small businesses, avoid what happened here. Mark and I went through it. The backlash was hard on him, on his business, but he stayed. He held my hand during the court hearings and helped me move my things into a new, smaller apartment that I chose for myself, one that didn't smell like anyone else's bread. Our relationship is quieter now, more mature, built on a foundation of brutal honesty. We're talking about a future. I visit my father on Tuesdays. The rental smells like stale coffee. He looks smaller, older, the bluster gone. At first he was cold, simmering with resentment, but the silence week after week finally cracked him. "I grew up with nothing," he admitted one afternoon, staring at the ankle monitor on his leg. "I was so terrified of losing what I built. When that big box store opened, I knew. I knew we were in trouble. But my pride, I couldn't let anyone see." I let the silence sit before I spoke. "I didn't destroy the Pierce name, Dad. Choices did." I looked at him not just as the man who betrayed me, but as the man who also coached my little league team and extended store credit to families who couldn't pay. "I know the good you did. I won't pretend that didn't happen. But I won't pretend this didn't happen either. If you're willing to rebuild with honesty, I won't stand in your way." I visited Evan last month at the low-security facility, just before he was approved for work release. He's thinner, the charming smirk gone replaced by a deep-set exhaustion. He apologized. A real apology with no excuses. "I always resented you," he confessed, looking at his hands. "Numbers just came to you. Everyone saw me as the big dreamer, but no one ever held me accountable for finishing." He said he wants to pay back what he took literally and figuratively. I looked at my brother, really saw him for the first time. "I don't hate you, Evan," I told him, and I was surprised to find it was true. "I hate what you did. There's a difference. I set my boundaries no more. Just sign this for me, not ever again." Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, but it was a start. Healing with my mother was the hardest bridge. She's working part-time stocking shelves at a discount store in the next town. I found her in her tiny, sterile apartment. She was still ashamed, but she clung to the old narrative. "We just wanted to keep the family together, Jenna." I had to stop her. "Family doesn't demand silence as proof of loyalty," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I needed you to protect me, Mom, not push me in front of the train." That's what broke her. She finally saw it, the cost. Not just the money or the reputation, but what it did to me, what it did to our neighbors. She wept an honest, ugly cry, and for the first time she apologized. Today was the grand reopening. The old Pierce Home and Supply building was bought by the new nonprofit using a combination of state support and the first restitution funds. It's now the Redford Community Workshop and Resource Center. There's a small library, a shared workspace for local tradespeople, and a financial literacy room where twice a week I teach workshops. The ribbon cutting was modest, just a potluck on folding tables. Mr. Dalton asked me to say a few words. I looked out at the faces: Mrs. Alvarez, the Crawfords, Kylie, Mark. I spoke about mistakes, about accountability, about how we can rebuild not by pretending nothing broke, but by learning from the break. Resilience, I said, isn't about never falling. It's about getting up and changing the way we walk. After, in the quiet, my family found me. Tom, Linda, and Evan, who'd been allowed to attend on a day pass. We stood there awkward and scarred. We weren't the glossy, perfect Pierces of old. We were just people trying. My father, his voice thick, cleared his throat. "You did what I didn't have the guts to do, Jenna. Thank you." Evan just nodded, saying, when he gets his first work release job, he wants it to be sweeping the floors right here. No titles, no schemes. Then my mother, her hands twisting, asked, Will you come to a small Sunday dinner at our rental? Nothing fancy, just chili and cornbread." I looked at their faces, wrecked, humbled, trying. I nodded. "Yes, I'll come." With boundaries, with my eyes wide open, not as the obedient daughter, but as an equal. Later tonight I walked past the center. The lights were on. Through the big glass windows, the same ones that had been covered in yellow tape, I could see a teen woodworking class in session. I saw someone helping Mrs. Alvarez set up a basic budget on a donated laptop. My family name isn't what defines me anymore. My choices do. The betrayal still hurts, a dull ache I'll probably carry forever, but it no longer owns me. The Pierces weren't fixed, neither was Redford. But we were building something honest, one nail, one apology, one ledger line at a time. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just part of the family story, I was the one writing it. And so Jenna learned that rebuilding a family, much like rebuilding a town, starts not with silence, but with accountability. What part of Jenna's stand resonated most with you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. For more stories of complex betrayal and hard-won justice, be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.